Hello and welcome back to ABW in conversation with. Who am I in conversation with now, you ask? Well, I mean, I've been in conversation with him for the last hour, but listeners, you might not know that, or maybe you do know that. I mean, who knows at this point? But we're doing back-to-back podcasts. We've just had a little conversation about Ben White, so that might give away who my guest is this evening. So tonight, ABW is in conversation with Mr. Josh Dorr. Good evening to you, Josh.
Good evening, Kris. I have switched us from right to left to right,
Yes.
keeping the host on the left-hand side. I thought it makes a little bit more sense and mixes up for people who are unfortunate enough to be stuck in a YouTube hole where they get us back to back.
Yes, beautiful transition from one to the other there. Love it. And yes, as I say, we have just done a podcast on Ben White. So if you haven't heard this and you're living in a vortex, check that one out. But this is very much ABW in conversation with. Josh, you are my fourth guest now? Or is it my fifth? Danny, Tom, Simon, Jeff, you're my fifth guest. You're number 5. So there we go. I'm hoping to get to 10 before the season starts, but we'll see how that goes. So much the same theme as usual. Pretty chill, pretty laid back. There's a few things I want to ask you and just dig into a bit about you and life, really, as well as some Arsenal to finish, of course. First things first, as I did in the last podcast, I must apologise for my ridiculous appearance. I've just got in from a very sweaty, very tough half marathon. So I'm not looking my best. Sorry about that, listener. So if you're watching this on audio, I'm sorry. Sorry on video. I'm very sorry. If you're listening to it on audio, lucky you. You don't want to smell what I smell like right now. Josh, you look resplendent, so we're all good. So let's kick off then. So I'm trying to think, how long have you been with ABW now? It's a couple of years, isn't it?
I think it is 6.
Is it that long?
6 years. Because you've got to think, when did we start the Hipsters English breakfast?
Oh, well, now you've asked.
There we go.
I've changed hairstyles about 8 times since then, so that's a little.
If the listeners will bear with, and they will allow me to dip into one of my social platforms, I have it dated.
Oh,
when
wow.
I joined, and I will be able to say when I joined Hipsters. So I have been since it was 2016, November 2016. So that is 4 years and 9 months.
It's coming up 5 years, to be fair.
Coming up 5 years.
That is, when you think about that, that's kind of mental, isn't it? We've been through a global pandemic. We've been through 3 managers since then. Got count knows how many Arsenal players. We've done 2 European tournaments, 3. The World Cup and Euros. I mean, the world has gone nuts. So what brought you to ABW? Talk us through your passport into the exclusive club.
So I would say it's similar to if anyone's listened to Simon Collins' one, in terms of started as a listener. I remember back in the heady days of 2012, 2013, when I was at university. First time I'd moved out from parents' house, and you're like, what do I do when I'm sitting on my own? And there are a few things you can do.
Don't answer that, please.
But sometimes you need a night off, and podcasting was one of the things that, you'd listen to podcasts. This newfangled thing, I would say, back in 2012, 2013, and looking for stuff for the Arsenal. And back then, you only had a few choices. You had Arseblog and you had ABW. I can't think of. You would have had, of course, some now ABWers. Goonersphere,
yes,
were still going or were going at that point, and I think that was
the original Tuesday Club. I think was around then, just
possibly, but wasn't on my radar back then.
And I think there was one. I think footballistically might have been in its early stages then, but it wasn't like. It wasn't with Boyd.
Maybe the Gooner Ramble, and I kind of started with reading The Grove. That was another one from reading blogs. Back then, again, we're going into when there was only about 3 or 4 bloggers. It was, The Grove, again, Arseblog, Gunner Blog, and our very own Dave. Goonerholic was the other one as well, really, of the big bloggers. I'm sure I've missed many other people who will be shouting from the rooftops, hey, I was blogging like that. Dave Seeger, if he's lucky enough to be listening, will probably be wringing my neck saying I was very active back then and I can only apologise. But it was a very small world, Arsenal podcasting. It's not like the days now. And I think that was... yeah, just listening along with the old group. It was listening to Gav and enjoying the fact that, you know, I was very much a football nerd at that point, watching a lot of football.
What do you mean
and it
was? Still are.
I'm watching football. I'm certainly not watching football with the regularity that people may expect for having the moniker of a football hipster. But back then it was a lot of football, at least 20 hours over a weekend I'd be watching. And yeah, so it was enjoying having like a refreshing thing of somebody who doesn't... I would always enjoy listening to somebody who only knows their team. They don't know about anything else and they're very brash, blazing about it. And you kind of like that. It's very rare that you get people in the world who are happy to say, not I'm stupid, but to open a weakness like that and say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always a great thing from there. There's a lot of bloggers, there's a lot of people who will come along with a very holier than thou. And to be fair, I've been accused of it, sounding very condescending in the way I talk and
I think we all have,
the way I come over. And I think anybody in the football hipsters has had that leveled at them. And I think you get to know me more, you realize that it comes across as that, but it isn't necessarily that. I think Jason Davies has always put it greatly, and why he always enjoyed podcasting with me and why I always enjoyed podcasting with him is you knew there was always something in my tank in reserve. I'd never let on, because I'd always lead you down a trap and then just drop a bit of information and say, oh, but you forgot this. And yeah, I think I've completely gone the wrong direction from what you actually asked of how I go to ABW.
I like it because it builds the picture. That's what I like. Yeah.
But yeah, so it was listening to like Gav, and then it would have been John in Venezuela.
Oh crikey! Yeah, that's good.
And who was in Barcelona? Was it another John? Is that the same John?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Good. Yeah, good. Yeah, John in Barcelona. Yeah.
John in Barcelona. Obviously Danny and Gimli, and and then it was kind of like, well, I'm enjoying doing this. Oh, enjoying listening to it. Maybe I'll start doing some stuff, but I was still very dormant for a couple of years. When the bloggers came around, I was one of the few that threw my blog over. Obviously, I've done a few in the past. Sadly, the Hipster site doesn't have my great blog that shows amazing foresight into Antonio Conte and Pep Guardiola's use of fullbacks, but will always be one that I will signal back to as kind of a, hey, I was talking about this 3 months into the season, let alone, before it was popular.
Yeah.
And I think that's just one of the things that, unfortunately, I didn't make the cut on that one, so no one ever got to it. And to be honest, it's probably for the best. I'm not particularly good. I wouldn't say I'm not a particularly good writer. I'm a better talker, infinitely better talker than I am writer.
Same.
But then what actually got me in was the Hipsters. Yeah. So obviously I'm telling Kris exactly the story that he knows because he was on the other side of it. It was chatting to Kris on Twitter, getting to know each other,
poor thing,
saying, realized I watched a lot of Championship football, mainly because, as if anybody has seen the Ben White podcast before this, will know that I've followed Brighton and Hove Albion, and I've followed them since I moved to Brighton, which was 2013. No, not 2013.
14? It was around that, wasn't it?
No, it's a lot earlier. It's 2004. There we go. That's it.
Wow. Okay,
yeah, I got the wrong decade in there. Yeah, so I was a little West Country kid beforehand, and then moved to Sussex, and my uncle was season ticket holder at Brighton, and took his nephew along to games, and that was my Second or third experience of live football. Certainly the one on the most regular basis, going to the Withdean. And it's always been what kind of started then my love for lower league football. Still league football, but in a stadium that is very raw. It is, I would implore anybody who, when I mention the Withdean, just Google and have a look at it. It still exists as an athletics track. And it was an athletics track when Brighton moved to it.
I didn't know it was still going. I thought they demolished it. That's news to me.
No, the Withdean is still very much there.
Wow. Because
it is a sports complex. That's what it always was. It always was a sports complex right next to Varndean College. And that's one that, I've always then enjoyed lower league, kind of watched Brighton in League Two, watched them in League One. If you'd have told me back in 2005, the team I was watching there would be, in the Premier League this season, after being in there now for the third consecutive season and selling a player for £50 million.
Yeah.
I would have told you were deluded, because this was a club that was on the brink. I think people have heard about, the Portsmouth story of how close they were going down and going under. Southampton was so close as well. Bournemouth and Brighton were just as close to being wiped off the face of the planet in terms of how close they were going under. But it was really, really interesting to see. I was an Arsenal fan before I went to Brighton games. I've been an Arsenal fan for, I would say my first, I'm sure we'll go into how I got to football, but we're still on the question of how I got into ABW.
That question's coming next. So
in terms of lower league football, enjoyed watching that, and then just built up a knowledge and continued watching that kind of style of football, and obviously watching Brighton in League One and the Championship mainly when I was at uni, because obviously it wasn't available to go to games. That it's just one of those that continued following them and just understanding that kind of league, what makes to get out of that league as well, because Brighton have had some very interesting managers across the times. Mark McGee, Russell Slade, Dean Wilkins, brother of Ray Wilkins. I was there for Dean Wilkins. Was there for Russell Slade. Was there for was it Mickey Adams? I think was there.
As well, didn't he?
I think so.
Was it Southampton? Yeah, I don't remember the name.
I can't remember. Mickey Adams was there. Yeah, I remember Russell Slade. There was some awful dross that came through. Obviously, Gus Poyet as well. Gus Poyet came when Brighton was still at the Withdean. And again, people look at this stadium. This is, even a League Two side would be embarrassed. And this was a team that was playing in the Championship still at the Withdean. And I think it was that kind of thing that was, that understanding. It was then, Kris, you were starting the English Breakfast. You and Ross had done a few episodes, but it was like, we need a third on here.
Yeah.
And there's a guy who's been annoying me in my DMs, talking about, he knows a lot about football. He's an Arsenal fan. He also follows Brighton closely, so can talk Championship, can talk League One with Ross. But let's get him started on something else. We've got a great platform that we launched, about a year or so before, in ABW Live. Yeah. So that was me as the tester. I came on, I think before then I was on a transfer deadline pod, maybe a few months, probably earlier in the season, because obviously we're talking like November, it's probably a few months before, kind of lost in the headlights of some more, more aggressive people on at the time in podcasting that had their own channels that were very much talking through there, not necessarily letting other people come into the conversation. And at first you're like big rabbit in headlights, what's going on? But coming into ABW for the live shows, did a couple of those, and then Kris was like, great, let's get you on the podcasts for the Hipsters. And that's kind of where I stopped doing ABW for a bit, because obviously I was in the Hipsters.
Yeah.
And if ABW needed people, I might come on for a live show, but I then wasn't really brought into the fold until the next season, I would say. Maybe in the January. Took a couple of months before, you got really desperate and you needed people for the live show. And I was available and consistent because I didn't have a social life. Well,
I was literally just looking there as you were talking, like looking back, as I've got a few things on my phone, like looking back at old tweets and some of the things that we put out with the Hipsters and stuff, and it does bring back some memories, and it does make sense now, like the times when you came aboard and when it all became a thing. So yeah, it's good memories. So what was it about football that got you hooked then? Because everyone has their own individual thoughts or reasons as to why they got into the game. And was it in the family, or was it just something you started playing?
This is where I can do a very... I'm going to set myself for a joke, but unfortunately I will stumble across the punchline because I already know the punchline. It's hilarious, and it won't come across as hilarious. But my family aren't particularly well versed in football. They're not a great... there's not a heavy push through it, albeit that my dad was... he played the game. He went through the Bristol Rovers Academy. He would have been in the same group as Ian Holloway, Tony Pulis. He's that kind of generation. Just fell out in love with the game. Probably would have pushed harder if the money was in it. But back then, there's no money in football. Got another vocation, became a chef. And my mum is a Spurs supporter. So there's the punchline. About not got a huge knowledge of football. So obviously I was pushed the Spurs fandom. My grandfather was a Spurs fan. He is he's about 1920s born ish, I think. Must be about there. Yeah. It's a couple of years on. Yeah. Doing the mental maths in my head. So he's about the 20s, and he always told me about North London, that he grew up in North London, not in Middlesex, let's say, very much I'm trying to put it in a way. If people don't know about London, North London, there is a very particular area that is Jewish. It's got a very Jewish base. And not all of the Jews went to Tottenham, albeit it's got that understanding as Spurs being the Jewish club in England, really. And there is a lot of international fans that go to Spurs because of that. Adam Rickman, the Man v Food, that's the reason why he's a Spurs fan, is because of that connection. But I remember him always telling me that what would happen on a Saturday was they'd go to a football game and they'd go into whichever ground would let them in at that point. They'd go down to Highbury. If they could pay on the gate and get in, they'd go. But, 9 times out of 10, but it was more like 7 times out of 10, they couldn't get into Highbury. They'd go to White Hart Lane instead. And that's how he then became a Spurs supporter, was because, Arsenal was more popular, couldn't get in, so ended up at Spurs. Exactly. He just took the other option that would let him in more consistently. So I've never had that proper Spurs rivalry or Arsenal rivalry, because he never had it. He didn't like the Spurs, or he didn't like the Arsenal, sorry. But he never had that kind of hate, because, to be honest, the way he got into football for a couple of years was I'd go into whichever ground. I just wanted to watch a football game. He'd go in wherever. And that kind of translates through. I think it's where I'm less partisan, I would say. It's the same with a lot of rivalries. I'm not very partisan at all with any of them. And it kind of comes from that. And then obviously he's a Spurs fan. My first kit that I've ever had, and I would actually like to find it, because it is, for me, it's a really nice kit. Whenever Spurs bring out a purple kit, I go a little bit quiet, because I do like a purple kit, and I always have, and that's always kind of started. And if you can think back to kind of the Spurs kits of the early 90s, it's the purple pony kit with purple and black stripes. It's that kit. That was my first ever kit, and as a little kid, I was one of those weird kids that at some point in his life decided he wanted to be a goalkeeper, because I don't know why, I liked Ian Walker. Someone had to.
I kind of did at the time, I'm not going to lie, if I'm looking back.
And at that point, when you're kind of 6, to be honest, I wasn't that big into club football. I loved England. I think this is bearing in mind coming off Euro 96. I don't remember Euro 96. I am surprised when any child of the 90s says they remember Euro 96. I call them a liar, because I don't think any child of the 90s can remember it. No. Really.
I mean, my first World Cup that I remember was 94 in America, and I was born in 83. I don't even remember Italia 90. Like, I think I watched a couple of games, but I wasn't. But I agree with you. I think you're too early to remember that.
You're too early for it. There's a couple of people with the kind of nostalgia, like Rob Beckett, especially was massive for it. I'd have to double check. He might be 88, which would, it's that 2 years that probably helps him out for that. For Euro 96, but I don't remember anything from Euro 96. But there is that kind of fever around the England team. So England was getting shown more. I'd watch Match of the Day. I played a lot of football, wanted to be a goalkeeper at that point. Then when playing as a goalkeeper, you realise you don't want to be a goalkeeper. Especially when the first big kid, firstly when the first big kid that's a few years older than you, because they're in year 6 and you're in year 3, kicks a ball at you as a goalkeeper, you realise, I'm all right, thanks. I'll be an outfield player now.
I'll let that one go.
But how I then transitioned from being a Spurs fan to an Arsenal fan is it's very kind of lucky. I would say for Arsenal fans, some viewers of this may say otherwise. Certainly fortuitous. So I remember getting a lot of hand-me-downs. I don't have any older siblings, but I've got, my mum was always on the lookout for somebody, an older boy in the village, or a friend of like my aunt's or something. Someone would have a big bag of stuff, because obviously you're growing out close so quickly, no one wants to pay anything. And in one of the bags was the 96 home kit for Arsenal. And it fit me perfectly. I'd just grown out of my Spurs kit. And for a kid that doesn't really care about football at that point, they're just sticking on the kit that they've got, really. I have no allegiance to anyone. Back then, my favourite player, hand on heart, is between David Beckham and Michael Owen.
One out of two is all right,
As an 8-year-old, Michael Owen could absolutely, he could walk on water as far as I was concerned after the World Cup 98.
I'll give you it. It makes me a little bit sick in my mouth, but
it does. I'll get on to 2002 where he has that final. Because I didn't like him after that. But growing up, it was that. He had the BBC Kids show as well. If anybody can remember that, it wasn't called Dream Team. Zero to Hero, I think, was what it was called. But again, I'm that kind of right age that it was targeted perfectly at me. I think that's straight after his World Cup. So I'd have been 8 or 9 at that point when that's coming out. That is, I'd have been 7 during. So I'm really early, really impressionable. You can stick a load of football at me. Those are my kind of idols. David Beckham is still one of my favourite players of all time. Irrespective of what he did in the Man United shirt, irrespective of what he did against Arsenal, still one of my favourite players. And will be. Just because how he is as a role model. Obviously, certainly haven't got the physique or good looks or hairline of David Beckham. But as you say, not many people do.
No.
But I got this Arsenal shirt, I was wearing it, and then I started watching, I then look out for Arsenal. And I see a player called Lee Dixon. And he plays right back. I'm left-footed. And So there's no chance of me ever playing right back at all. I'd probably be on the right side of the pitch, maybe fancy myself as a winger, maybe a defender, who knows. But Lee Dixon was a player that I don't know why I ended up liking him. No offense, Lee. Not that you're watching.
But I'm sure he's tuned in.
Yeah, I'm sure he's tuned in. Or I mean, now that I've done a couple of shows with Kevin Campbell, maybe my name's got out there. Who knows? Yeah, Kev might be on his old WhatsApp for the old dressing room, and maybe they're all tuning into ABW now because there's a great guy on there called Josh.
Yeah,
probably not. Who knows? But yeah, no, I don't necessarily mean it in that way. But he was the player that kind of stood out to me. I don't know why, but I was looking at defenders. But as I say, I was moving one down from goalkeepers at that point. But the England national team was full of Arsenal players at that point. Certainly in goal, anyway. We had, as my mum and I would call him, Old David, as David Seaman, because Old David was then replaced by New David.
Yeah.
So that's how David Seaman became Old David, was then you had New David. And that was the easiest way that we worked out what the difference was. You had David James come in. And yeah, that was a big thing.
Heady times.
Heady times for England. But that's, how I really got into Arsenal, and then just followed them and kept following them. And obviously what helps is you then get success coming with it.
Yeah.
And then when you see the success coming through, that then basically was what started me as an Arsenal fan. It annoyed my grandparents, certainly, on that side. But then my mum's not massive into football, and my dad was completely ambivalent. He's like, whatever, fine. He's not bothered. You support that. The fact he didn't even push me down a Bristol route. He doesn't support Bristol of either side. But does appreciate good football. And I think that's really the difference. I've certainly dodged a couple of bullets. You can go into my first ever game that I saw was with my football team. When you take the kids at the local football team, get one. Get a load of tickets and send us in. Was to Swindon Town versus Crewe Alexandra. And that was League Two. Absolute classic. 2-1 loss for Swindon in that game. I can't tell you too much about it, other than I have looked it up a couple of times. I think it was in 97. Because at that age, it was when I'd only just started wearing glasses. And at that point, none of my football mates really knew I wore glasses unless they went to school with me. So I didn't take my glasses with me. So I didn't see half the game. And I still have like 2 memories of that, or maybe 3. I have 3 memories. One, not being allowed to bring in my glass bottle of Lucozade. Remember when Lucozade came in glass bottles? Oh, that was a thing. I wasn't allowed to take that in. So they'd let us take all the other drinks in because people didn't care back then. It wasn't like, no, you got to pay £8 for a bottle of Coke inside.
Not a glass bottle of Lucozade.
And they were like, why? And to be fair, they looked at their ticket, they realised we're in row Z and I'm 7. There's no way I'm launching that at a player.
No.
And my other memory, other than not being able to see half the game, because it was slightly blurry, was the local Barmy Army kind of fan. If you can think of an old English, and if I say Barmy Army one, you know the one I'm talking about. He is probably fairly rotund, probably absolutely stinks of BO. We can assume those 2 things. And he has got a big hat on, and it is covered in club badges, club pins. It's full of them from various seasons because, pins were big back in, I imagine, from the 50s. Kind of carried through that. You got the club pins, and he had every single one in his hat. And I remember being offered to wear his hat and being told by the friend's mum that was escorting us through there not to put his hat on. Don't put the weird Matt's hat on that definitely hasn't been washed ever. Been worn to who knows how many Swindon games, and been rained on constantly, sweated on.
So it's a beautiful story of how you met Danny. That's
it is.
Who knew that Danny used to be a Swindon Town fan? So my first, you talk about that. My first non-Arsenal game or game involved a school trip was actually Villa Spurs at Villa Park. I think it was, I want to say 95. It was in the era when Stan Collymore was playing for Villa.
Yeah.
And I think Spurs had the Holston Umbro kit, if I remember. I think Klinsmann was still playing for Spurs then. So, I remember that. And
so at that point, Villa Park must have actually felt, wasn't run down.
It was one of the. I think Brian Little was the manager at the time, for memory, and they had those really nice Muller kits with the quite thick claret and blue stripes. Really nice kit that, and their away kit was black and green stripes. Really nice kit that was back in the day. But and my other small confession, which transitions us beautifully into England, was when my memory of Euro '96 obviously was watching it. I remember the Poborski chip. And that was one thing that always sticks in my mind for Czech Republic. But I also remember being an England fan at the time. I will out myself. At that point, I was an England follower. And I had an England shirt. And to be fair, it was one of the better shirts with that crossover collar. And it was a nice looking shirt. I had Barmby 7 on that shirt.
Ooh.
Do you remember Nick Barmby?
I do remember Nicky Barmby. That's an excellent one.
And I think at the time, I know he played for Middlesbrough. But I think at the time he was a Spurs player.
I was going to say there was a chance that you were going to have a Spurs player on the back.
Yeah.
Because it was a fairly Spurs heavy team, wasn't it? It was Gaza. Anderton was there as well. I do remember Anderton being another one of my favourite players. But obviously, when you're trying to look out for your favourite player, you're very confused why Darren Anderton would only turn up 10 times a season.
Yes.
When you're a youngster. Yeah, I would sick note.
And bear in mind, this is, like you say, 96. So I was born in 83. So what was I, 30? So I was around about in that sort of period where I didn't really fully, I knew I was an Arsenal fan, but I didn't really understand the levels of tribalism, I guess, like you would call it. And in 1996, actually, Nick Barmby signed for Middlesbrough in the 95-96 season. And apparently he was, there you go. He went from, he was Middlesbrough's most expensive signing in June of 1995. So he would have been a Middlesbrough player in Euro 96. 5.25 million. What a time to be alive. It doesn't exclude the fact he was a Tottenham, 92 to 95. He was a Tottenham guy. But when I had him on my Euro 96 shirt, he was a Middlesbrough player. So I think I'd get away with that one.
I think you can get away with that.
I think it was the Middlesbrough. It was the Middlesbrough era when they had Juninho and Ravanelli, and it was in that era. I think they played at Highbury on the opening day of that season, if I remember rightly, and they got a 1-1 draw. I think Barmby might even have scored in that game. But in their
that was during the big. It must have been during the big Middlesbrough paying everybody loads of money. I can't remember the player that they threw.
Emerson. They had a midfield.
It was Emerson, but there was a striker that they went after that didn't end up going with them, but was meant to. I'm sure it was someone like Lineker that they were going after.
Wouldn't be surprised.
They were throwing silly money
because they had Ravanelli and they had Jan Helge Fjortoft just before he left, and they had Mikkel Beck, who had wonderful hair in that era. Mark Schwarzer was their goalkeeper back then. They had like Steve Vickers at the back and Clayton Blackmore and. Oh yeah, it was a time to be alive. But I did want to ask you about England and the Euros. We've had many conversations about my allegiances to France and your allegiances to England. So when we were doing the Hipsters pod and we were sort of talking about it then, I think even you dared to believe, didn't you? At some point, I think you thought it was potentially going to arrive home, quote unquote.
So I would say the team that I have supported the longest, if we can call them a team, and I think in certain pub quizzes and certain general football quizzes, they will include national teams as a team, would be England. As I say, I remember the World Cup 98 in France vividly. I had the World Cup 98 ball. I had, and I remember the group stages vividly. I remember being the only person shouting and the only person watching the game actually for England Tunisia when they scored the second goal. I had to shout to my parents to come in because we just scored. But in terms of this kind of Euros, I was never really sure. I think we always knew that getting to the semis in the World Cup was we'd done the best with a bad bunch. I don't think what I ever realised was Southgate's ability to turn a team that was very agricultural in only 2 years ago to a team and integrate the talents he had so much better, because we are very much talking about, imagine going from Tony Pulis to Pep Guardiola in terms of the talent that's available to you. Yeah. It's going from a team that was very, very defensive, had Eric Dyer as your creative midfielder, in the low block, to then going to having the players like Declan Rice coming through, Calvin Phillips coming through, Bukayo Saka. I remember, and there are many members of the Hipsters pod that do mention consistently that I went on record and I said I would be absolutely shocked if Bukayo Saka played a single minute for England, because there was no precedent for it. Based on even during the Nations League, there was no precedent for having and for Southgate bringing these exceptional talents in. You see how long it took to bring Grealish into the side. I think, to be honest, in hindsight, I see why it took so long, because there are a couple of faults to Grealish's game, but we're not here to talk about him. But it was after we beat Germany, because that was, I remember saying, we'll get through the groups, so it will give us an idea of what we're doing. I don't know how we should finish out of the groups. I don't know whether or not we should try and take the easy route that then becomes a very hard route, or we take an initially very hard route that becomes slightly simpler route to the final, especially with all the home fixtures and the, I would say, great advantage that gave us. Because it certainly was an advantage. It was basically a home tournament for 3 or 4 teams. In the mostest that at least 2 teams played 4 games at home. England obviously playing the majority. Italy, I think, played 4 games in Italy. But that's the kind of thing that I kind of saw. As soon as we got Germany, I knew there was a chance, but I still wasn't sure, because I've been let down by, as the song goes, of 56 years of hurt. It's always been, don't trust it too much. As soon as we beat Germany, or we got drawn with Germany, I knew that was the game we wanted, purely out of the atmosphere that I knew people that probably fueled by stuff that isn't necessarily something we want to see in football, but is something very English, was that kind of, we needed to get that kind of hatred towards Germany. And this is where I kind of go back into, I haven't got that partisan nature to me. But England and Germany, for years, everybody knows why England don't like Germany. Germany don't necessarily reciprocate with that, but then losers tend not to like winners, and tend to not give them the ammunition they need. And they're quite good at doing that. They don't see that rivalry. But I think that was where I kind of thought England had a chance. This was turning out quite well. Depends on how the draw goes underneath. I was still worried when we got to the semi-final against Denmark, to be honest, because I would say anybody coming fresh into the tournament just thought, oh, Denmark, be fine. But Denmark. Unfortunately, because I follow England quite closely, I'd know that Denmark were a tricky team for us, because we played them twice in the Nations League not that long ago and struggled massively against them. And especially with extra, I want to say, incentive motivation that Denmark had through that tournament. I think England were very lucky in terms of they got to the difficult teams when the difficult teams were fatigued heavily. The Ukraine game, if they played Ukraine in the round of 16, that's not a 4-0 game.
Ukraine was shot, weren't they, in that game?
They were absolutely destroyed, and the same for Denmark as well.
Yeah.
Denmark turned up and they were leggy as hell.
They gave a good 55, 60 minutes, and then
they made us worry, certainly. And to be honest, I think a lot of my any energy going into England was being squarely aimed at, for some reason, I'll want to continue playing the England captain in games where he was not anywhere near the right pace for the game.
Yeah.
And there was better options on the bench. That was probably not. And to be honest, I have to look at it, and I always try and place myself against other people, of other fans of England, and that don't have that Spurs rivalry as much as Arsenal do. So I speak to West Ham fans. One of my colleagues is part of the England travel group, so went to every single game and had tickets for it easily. That was one of them that I was just like, Kane is rubbish, right? And he's like, yeah, he is. He's just not at the pace of it. He's a great striker. We've seen him score countless number of goals against both of our sides in the Premier League, but he just wasn't suited to that tournament. He just wasn't ready. And for me, Southgate, that decision he made had made a rod for his own back, giving Kane the captaincy. For me, that wasn't the obvious choice. I think in hindsight, you make captain the player that, although I don't like him, and I thought he was one of the main reasons we lost to Croatia in the semi-final, was the fact that he's so bad with the ball. It's Jordan Henderson, a guy that had captained from the bench, wasn't playing in that Liverpool side when they won the Champions League, wasn't in the side when they won the league necessarily, wasn't first name on the team sheet anyway, due to either injury or, wasn't the right player for the situation.
Yeah.
And that was a player you could do that with. I don't think you could do that with Harry Kane. I don't think he's got that strength to be dropped. I think he plays every game no matter what, and he's forced in, or he's got a great situation in Spurs where he doesn't have to play or he does have to play every game. Even if he's at 40%, he's better than the other options, because no one in their right mind, any striker, is going to Spurs. One, because they won't pay the wages, and secondly, there's no chance of any games.
Yeah, exactly.
They had Vinicius last season, I think, from Benfica on loan. He's on loan. He's not going permanent. They've always struggled for that backup one. But that's not a problem you have in international football. You could call up all of the best players. Calvert-Lewin's never going to sit behind Harry Kane at Spurs. If Spurs went to Everton and gave them the money they wanted, Calvert-Lewin's not going.
No.
But international football, you have that strength in depth. Look on the wings. If Saka wasn't doing it, you had arguably the best under-21 player in Europe in Jadon Sancho available on the bench. That doesn't happen at club level.
No.
Unless you're a super elite team. Unless you're Man City. Even Liverpool don't have depth for Salah and Mane. No. Arguably.
Even a club like PSG wouldn't say they had a huge, they got Mbappe and Neymar, but then you're down to Moise Kean on loan, and I mean, you'd argue Di Maria's a forward, but you know what I mean, Moise Kean.
Yeah, and then it's it was Diaby, wasn't it? And Diaby then moved to Leipzig. Leverkusen. Yeah,
and you had before that had the likes of Pastore and yeah, exactly.
He's got Draxler, who's then there, and Draxler's a shadow of his former self as well. Quite a big shadow.
And that's a club with unlimited money. And then you could go down the Real Madrid, Barcelona, but I mean, that's a whole other story this season. But
and that's the kind of thing that kind of annoyed me. One thing that I think always add to my pessimism is purely because of that striker role, that unless Southgate sees the light and either rotates him out because that guy's not fit or gives another guy a chance, I can't see England progressing into a final and winning it.
You needed a Danny Ings, I think. Personally.
What we needed was Calvert-Lewin, because at the end of that final, although the substitutions I didn't agree with either, I think Trippier should have stayed on the field. Mason Mount wasn't the player for that final. Yeah, he played a Champions League final and he played quite well. He'd had an average tournament. He takes information very well. If you feed him the information, he's basically the equivalent of Willian now for Chelsea. Takes information really well. Yeah, not quite as chunky. But, does his instructions, isn't necessarily the player for you, but will bring a moment. For me, that when you take off Trippier and Mount and then you don't replace them with players that can take set pieces, you're down to your third or fourth choice. And then you've still got, if Maguire then goes up and if it wasn't Kyle Walker, I can't even remember who the other England centre-back was. That's how much I've put it out of my memory.
Mings and...
it wasn't Mings that played in the final. Maguire and...
Who did play?
I can't remember.
No, I can't remember. Who is the other bloody England centre-back?
Told you. That's how memorable it was. No, it wasn't Ben White.
I'm going to have to look
we took a million centre-backs with us. And for some reason, I can't remember who played next to Harry Maguire. It wasn't Michael Keane. That was one thing I was very happy about. We stopped taking Michael Keane with us to tournaments. The other centre-back was John Stones.
Oh, of course.
It's John Stones.
It's been a long day, boys and girls.
It's because he didn't mess up. That's why. Yeah. Everyone remembers John Stones when he messes up. Yes, Stones and Maguire, if they're coming forward, all right, that's enough for Italy to think about. But you've got a striker that can't jump anymore. His ankles are shot to pieces. He doesn't get elevation in the air, doesn't fancy headers anymore. You've seen what he does now when a header's an option. He goes and tries to kill the player instead.
Yeah.
And what you have got... Yeah, exactly. And your other option is a scouser that can leap like a salmon. I know he's not the kind of meme levels of Ronaldo in terms of the heights he can jump, but there's some pictures that come pretty fucking close in terms of the level of spring that boy can get.
For a big guy as well. I mean, he's not a small guy, is he? So.
Exactly. He's still plus 6 foot and he could jump almost his height up. He can get at least 5 feet off the ground for a header. That is the guy you want in the box when at that time, Italy, no, they are just fouling us 40 yards away from goal because they know our only real option is probably Calvin Phillips, who takes an all right set piece. But when you've got no one in the box that fancies jumping for it, or at least your only options are your two centre-backs and not a striker.
Yeah.
That was, for me, one of the big letdowns.
And that's where, because I can hear Ross listening to this now screaming James Ward-Prowse, because he was the one, wasn't he? Like, you had to find space for him in that team.
I think certainly that made sense that James Ward-Prowse has been there. But I would also say in that particular moment, it doesn't necessarily help because, or at least in the squad anyway, you had Kieran Trippier. He takes a really good set piece. Luke Shaw was taking excellent set pieces for the entire tournament. Unfortunately, we were getting fouled on the other side of the pitch. So an outswinger from a lefty wasn't what you needed.
No.
And it was that right foot player. And then taking Mason Mount off, and I know I've just criticised him, but again, takes a good set piece. Has that quality ball into the box, and we just didn't have that, and that was just down to the substitutions. I think if you don't take Trippier off, we don't have a problem. We probably win it, to be honest. I think it's up there with that big a mistake, that if Trippier stays and plays the full 90 minutes and you bring someone pacey on to push Italy back, because that was the big problem, was Italy finally realised that they could push England back, and Trippier's going to be there in terms of the pace, but he's your only real option. Shaw might be there as well, but Mount isn't pushing. Sterling is quick and he might sit on the last man, but that's the only person you're looking at because Mount's going to want to drop deep and Kane's going to want to drop deep. So you're only really dealing with sitting on your back line is Sterling every once in a while, because again, he's going to come short for it. There wasn't a Saka, there wasn't a Sancho. It was the player I wanted to come on with Sancho at that point to drive Italy back, because that was the big problem. All the problems came because Italy were allowed to play their high line again. And in the first half, that's what we'd stopped them doing. was we were getting in behind. And that's how Luke Shaw managed it. Trippier to Luke Shaw, goal. Kane's nowhere near it. And that's what we needed, was someone with a bit of pace. Even Ollie Watkins, if we didn't take him in the end.
Yeah.
That's what you wanted in behind.
That
was a player you wanted in behind. And that was my biggest frustration, is there were a number of mistakes that were made in that final.
Yeah.
On the upside, I think going into the next tournament is that Southgate seems to learn as a manager. And whilst I haven't necessarily liked him, he's addressed some of the mistakes. He's done a lot of changes that have been good for England. And I think he talks very well as well. And I think at a moment of probably national crises, there's multiple crises in England at the moment, not just the pandemic. Yeah, I wasn't going to make it political. I was just going to mention them as euphemistically.
Yeah.
But I think there are a number of ones above and beyond Brexit and the pandemic. Certainly hugely highlighted with the 3 players targeted post the shootout.
Yeah.
That's also another one, and he talks very well about all of those aspects. And I think that is what you actually need as an England manager, because, to be honest, and I don't necessarily tar a generation or a group of people with one brush, but certain people, or any people, listen to certain people as role models. And there is a group of people out there that the England manager is a role model for us. The same way that for me, David Beckham's a role model for me. Anything David Beckham says, I'm going to take with a little bit more gospel. He says Hyde Club is a good whiskey. I've had Hyde Club. It's not a good whiskey, but David Beckham convinced me it was enough for me to buy a bottle of it, and then realize might as well have saved my money and bought some lighter fluid. So I think that's the kind of thing, that there is a generation of people that listen to the England manager as kind of a beacon of stuff. They won't listen to a politician, or they won't listen to like a scientist. But if it comes from a footballer, someone that they respect, and I think there is respect for guys like it, people will listen, and there will be change. And I think there are certain things that the England manager can reach a group of people that other people can't. A bit like how Arsene Wenger reached Arsenal fans.
Yeah,
as well. I think it's another great example as well.
And that's a beautiful transition into our final topic, because we do have to talk Arsenal. We got about roughly 10 minutes left, so let's do that. I don't really want to kind of dive into preseason too much, because I've kind of done that with Simon and Jeff. So I really want to talk to you more about what you want to see and what you anticipate seeing, because we're 13 days off the start of the season, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. Fans, I mean, as far as I know, it's full capacity. I don't think anyone really knows the rules in this country at the moment, but it's likely to be a pretty hefty capacity, if not full. And what do you want to see? I mean, what's that? Are you excited? Because I was talking to Jeff. He's not hidden the fact he's very excited about the season. I would describe myself as cautiously pessimistic about the season. So, where do you sit?
I would probably start it like most people. I fell out of love a little bit with Arsenal and with football generally during the pandemic. There was too much football on. The Euros helped me through it. I think there is a lot of people at the moment, and a lot of commentators suffering with fatigue and jaded by the amount of football coming out. There is people that I respected and still respect in some regards to their opinions on football, who have completely lost the plot because they've watched too much football. They haven't had a rest. There's dodgy opinions. There's stuff coming out from, I won't name names, but there are at least one entire podcast group and one particular podcast across a couple of different podcasts who also writes a lot about particular aspects of Arsenal that I would say has watched too much football right now and is broken and is jaded and just needs time off. It's just coming out absolute terrible takes and opinions. And I think I was quite fortunate. I pulled away a lot of football. I think a lot of people could see it that doing the live shows. The last season of Jace, when it was just me and him doing them constantly, watching turgid football in an experience where I actually liked watching without crowds. I enjoyed it. It was very interesting, and I maintained having an interest in it a lot longer than other people did. It certainly made me stop watching international football in terms of I wasn't watching a lot of the rest of the leagues. I think I watched a couple of Bundesliga games when it came back.
Yeah, the novelty factor.
It was the fact that football's back, and then I was like, not that bothered, to be honest.
Yeah.
The Rhine derby doesn't really have the same appeal when there's no Schalke and Dortmund fans tearing each other up in the ground. So I think that was. I still got a little bit of that fatigue left over. I think one of the things that's kind of going to help is going back to live football. England certainly helped because England, for me, is where I have a lot less rationale when I watch. Far more irrational when I watch England than I am when I watch Arsenal. I'm far more driven on emotion when I watch England. I don't know why, but it's just the way it is. I think it's because they play fewer games and because I've watched them from a younger age.
That's perfectly
with a certain intensity. And I think, so for this kind of season coming up, I am looking forward to it. I think crowds coming back in, it'll be an exciting season. We only play once a week, which I think will help us as a fan base kind of do that bit of relaxing. The fact we'll only be dealing with Arsenal once a week, it's not every 3 days. I think that fatigued a lot of fans. And just generally, and I think it's one of the main reasons why we're not doing live shows or raw reactions or whatever people are calling it these days for the games this season. Because as great as the content that comes, and we produce some great content on that to blow smoke up my proverbial, it is difficult to do. I realize it's the world's tiniest violin for streamers who do it on a part-time basis, having to do content. But yeah, I think it did break a lot of people, and might be something we ramp up after this season. So I'm kind of going into it just going, great, I've got maybe 45 games of Arsenal next season, spaced out over whatever. Hoping for a good cup run. I've got fairly high expectations for it. I expect us to have 2 good cup runs because we don't have any other football.
Is that dangerous?
And
to expect that, I mean, like, is that maybe a danger?
I would say
expect Arsenal to do anything good.
Mikel has done something for Arsenal fans. He's done a lot of things that people will put in the negative column and a lot of things that some people will put in the positive column. One of the things I think we can all agree on is, whilst we may not have done it in a pretty way, we are a darn sight better against clubs that are better than us than we have been in a long time. Obviously, there are now more clubs that are better than us than there has been in a long time, based on the 8th place finish. Exactly. But in terms of our showings against Chelsea, against United, I mean, United didn't take. We didn't lose to United. We were unbeaten against them in the league this season.
You seem to suddenly get good against the big clubs, didn't we?
Yeah, City will either blow us away, or we'll have a little cagey game and we'll come out pretty well with it. Liverpool, I think there's still the jury's out against them. In
They're
terms
almost
of
a dark horse now because they got forgotten about last season.
They got forgotten about, and I still expect Liverpool to rip us a new one in certain ways. Because they've just got that quality. That we can't cope with. That you can't. There's only so many tactics you can put in place, but when certain things happen on the field, there's some things you can't stop. It's almost like the Lionel Messi phenomenon. You can man mark him with your entire field, but he'll still get through. He'll still have an impact on the game.
Agree. Yeah.
But I would say generally, in a cup run, I can see us doing quite well. At least 2 semis, if that's too much to ask.
We love a semi on this podcast.
Exactly. But I think it's something that we should be pushing through and having a good run in these cup competitions, because we've got that ability. We've shown it.
Let me ask you something just quickly on that. The cup competitions,
Mm-hmm.
would you, bear in mind the fact that we haven't got any European football this season, would you be going close to full strength in the Carabao, Milk, Rumbelows, Coca-Cola, whatever it is, cup?
Yeah, in terms of the depth.
It's a winnable cup, isn't it? I mean, Man City have proved that.
In terms of the depth that we've got in the squad, obviously, we're trying to move players on. But you can get away with quite a light squad this season. And I think we'll see us doing a lot of loan deals, not necessarily because we're looking to move players on or we're struggling to move players on, but because we'll actually need them next season. Yeah. So like Joe Willock is probably a prime example. We're obviously still looking for a number. Well, I say obviously. We don't really know, but I imagine a player that plays in kind of a number 10 or plays, between the lines, like Joe Willock does. Yeah. Someone in there. We're looking for an upgrade on that, which is arguably an upgrade on Smith Rowe, who was our best player last season in that particular role. So we're looking for a player there. It's probably not Joe Willock, because Joe Willock probably doesn't want to compete and play only 10 games. He's already had a sip of the Kool-Aid. He knows exactly what he could get at Newcastle. It might not be good quality football that he gets, but he gets 35 games next season, probably injury-free. He'll get the majority of fixtures for Newcastle. He'll only get 10 fixtures for us. There's another centre-back, who shall not be named. Again, there's not necessarily, if you're not necessarily already in the forefront of Mikel's mind, chances are you're only going to get a handful of games next season because he's got that stubbornness. And one thing that kind of annoys me is whenever people talk about his stubbornness, they point it back to Pep Guardiola. Pep's not actually that stubborn.
No,
he loves mixing it. Arteta's stubbornness comes from his manager before. That's David Moyes.
Yeah.
If you have a look at when a West Ham player this season gets injured and look at the player that comes in to replace him, watch how long it takes David Moyes to drop the player that come in, irrespective of their quality, to bring back the player that was there. Say, for example, and I don't wish it on him, Declan Rice gets injured. Watch a player come in. It might be Mark Noble. And Declan Rice is then back. Mark Noble will play the next 2 fixtures at least before Rice gets a chance in, if Noble's been playing well.
Yeah.
Because he just he has faith and gives faith to the players that if they're playing well, I'm not going to drop you. And it's that kind of stubbornness that we'll see players like Willock not necessarily get their chances. And if you're fortunate enough that you're on a huge amount of wages and, to be honest, you're getting to the twilight of your career, you don't necessarily fancy another jaunt out to, you don't fancy moving house this year. Let's put it that way. You don't fancy going transatlantic. And you can sit on your 220 grand a week and maybe trot out for 10 games. Sure, you can be Willian.
I was going to say the Willian, yeah.
Exactly. We've got depth there, so we'll happily let Joe Willock go out on loan. Next season, though, when we're back in Europe, we're going to have... Hopefully, fingers crossed. If we're in the Europa League conference, that's an opportunity for Joe Willock to play probably all of those games all the way through. It should do. And then with good performances in that, will translate to him having opportunities in the Premier League. Obviously, we don't know what season he'll have. So that completely... It could be that he's first name on the team sheet because he turns into a second coming of, I don't know, Dele Alli as a goal-scoring midfielder is the only one I can think of off the top of my head right now.
Lundberg is a far better.
He is. I saw him as a winger. I was trying to think of some kind of goal-scoring midfielder. Cesc.
I mean, yes, even Frank Lampard's better than Dele Alli.
Frank
I mean,
Lampard, sorry.
anything in that bracket is fine.
Yeah, Frank
Dele
Lampard.
Alli is,
There's one. Fat Frank. He comes second coming Fat Frank.
Yeah.
Then he probably comes straight into the team because we've got to build around a player like that. It's probably not going to happen, but that's where he then gets the opportunity at Arsenal. And I think that's where it might frustrate a lot of people, that we'll see some people go out on loan who we think we should be selling.
Yeah.
But I think the view is for squad building for next season, we've kind of got to flux back to a squad size of maybe only 20, 25. Yeah. I mean, Wolves went through the entire season playing 19 players.
Yeah.
You don't need a big squad for the Premier League.
Kind of nuts, really, isn't it?
Exactly. And then what you then need is then to flux back up to a big squad. That's why so many teams fail to push on when they make Europe, or they just completely discard Europe and go again for it in the league. I'm talking like West Ham, Leicester City. Leicester are actually really interesting to have a look at, is how after they won the league, the number of signings they brought in, I think they brought in 6 first team players because they needed to bring that squad back up. Well, they needed to bring that squad up to compete.
Yeah.
Because your first teamers then want to play in the Champions League, and they don't necessarily want to play against West Brom away. Mazza and that's the kind of thing that we've got to look at. I think is there's the short term of we could upgrade on Granit Xhaka, but there's also a thing of if Granit Xhaka is happy to play a bit part role this season, with the knowledge that next season if we make Europe, he'll play slightly more of a larger role next season, a bit like Elneny as well. I think there's a couple of players that we could probably get away with cover of just 2 players in each position across most of the season. And we don't need any further depth than that. But going to Europe, we will need probably to be like 3 deep before we're picking players out of the youth academy. Yeah. So I think there's still a lot of work to do.
We've got 31 days, haven't we, in August to... we're going to go into a season without necessarily the squad that we go into the season with, if you know what I mean. Like, by the end of August, there will still be some players in here on August the 30th that we want to ship out. I mean, like, Kolasinac is a prime example. You can see him moving at quarter midnight on deadline day to, I don't know, Everton, can't you? You can just, you see that. Whereas someone like, I mean, the thought of Granit Xhaka getting a new deal makes me turn in my grave before I'm even dead. But you can see that deal getting done. To me, the whole new contract offer is bait because we're trying to get Rome to just get it off their arse and get it done.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can also see like a player like Willock sticking around till the end of the transfer deadline day, and us potentially, drafting in a last minute Odegaard deal and then saying to Joe, fine, you can move on. But there's a lot of dominoes that have got to fall before we...
Exactly. And I think that's one of the big problems is everybody around Europe tends to not have a lot of money right now. So we've got to wait
for each other to move, aren't they?
Yeah, they're all waiting for each other to move. As soon as stuff drops, then people have got to do stuff. Ben White going to Arsenal right now, £50 million. That's now £50 million in Brighton's pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
I think every man and his dog could tell you what position Brighton are probably going to invest some of that money into.
Yeah.
And if they're going to go onto the continent like they normally do for certain deals, well, that's a French, Flemish, Dutch. Hopefully they avoid at least 2 of those markets because they've not done well in those particular markets recently. But going into another market and picking a player up there, then it's kind of, getting that money to flow through football.
Yeah. Keeping it as an active sort of...
Definitely. And there's certainly players I think we can think of generally that need to move across. And I think this is only temporary in terms of a lot of these clubs that are struggling for money right now.
Yeah.
We should be taking advantage of that in a couple of ways. And one of them is going and buying players out from these clubs that are struggling for money. Bruno Guimaraes at Lyon being one, Lyon, whilst very well run, and probably not in as much debt as clubs that are going bust in
Spain.
in Spain, or even in France.
Yeah.
With like Lille
Bordeaux
having
were
to,
this close until they got a new owner. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a number of clubs that are very close to it due to COVID mainly.
Yeah.
And that season where they've got a lot of lost revenues. Obviously, their TV deal hasn't necessarily helped them as well. But we're going to come into a season where I imagine we're going to see stadia with more fans in it. So the gate receipts are going to start climbing. And as more countries get vaccinated, they're going to start opening these up more and more. I think England is a bit of a test bed. Or Petri dish, depending on how you want to look at it. For how the rest of Europe's going to react, but in terms of France and Germany are on at least level or ahead of us. Spain are close to us in terms of adults that are vaccinated. They're going to start opening stadia for sure.
Until
start bringing people in.
Lockdown 4, the witch's curse.
Whatever we name that one. So that's where I can see us kind of giving players new contracts so they maintain their value, and then send them to these teams on loan. Getting them around Europe, they're going to fatten up again. And then because we know football and, kind of money doesn't necessarily always, they can kind of bounce off that kind of stuff. Someone somewhere, no matter whatever financial crisis is going on, is making money from it. And at some point they'll buy a football club. I think that's where we can base, and then they'll put their money into it. Exactly.
Somebody will. Yeah, somebody stupid enough to do it.
Like there'll be someone in pharma right now who is making an absolute shed ton from, although they're not selling the COVID vaccine for what they could sell it for. They're at least they're getting a lot of sales coming through. They'll get a nice big bonus and whatever, and who knows? Well, Bayer already owned Bayer Leverkusen.
Exactly.
Already a history of it. There's going to be money coming into the game one way or another. And I think that's one thing that I think perhaps we're looking at, and we're taking a little bit of a risk by having quite a lot of players on our books, but it worked all right for Chelsea with their loan army of 49 players out on loan.
Good old days.
But if you kind of look at it and thinking, but their loan army wasn't just kids. They had players like Bakayoko out on loan. That was a first teamer for them. Brought in to make a difference to their squad. They set a number of players out on loan, and I think that could be one. And while some people might get annoyed, that I'm thinking I could see this situation happen with a certain right back of Spanish descent with certain accent who's potentially on the way to Inter Milan, is if we sign a new contract with him before sending him to Inter Milan on loan.
To raise his valuation.
Raise his value. Inter, they need a player now, but they don't have the money for it. Now, what possibly happens is, we send them Hector Bellerin and we manage to at least clear our book. We've got that done. Who knows? By deadline day, they might sell Lautaro Martinez for 90 odd million pounds to some oligarch somewhere in, England or Russia. They might end up with a huge influx of cash that they could then spend. What they might do is set some of that aside now, and we've gone, if Bellerin has a decent season for you and you want to buy him, well, we've just signed him to a new contract. So when you could have paid 20 million for him, possibly, you've now got to pay 35 million because you're flush with cash that didn't come in at the right time. And I think perhaps we've got that coming into it. And, if Hector then, I imagine he might be more happy to come back to Arsenal. Certainly some fans won't be, but I think there's that to it as well, that if Hector comes back, great, we've got another backup right back for next season. When we've got European fixtures, Calum Chambers has cemented himself as our next right back, and Cedric now is in his 30s and fancies going back to his holiday home in Lisbon. Hence back to Lisbon. Who knows? There's lots of things that change around football, and I think one of the things that is certainly going to be frustrating is that kind of echo chamber of disillusion from fans of, I don't know, there almost needs to be somebody just coming out to shoot the shit and go, this is how transfers work. And go, and you don't want to fall back to, it's not like Football Manager, it's not like FIFA.
No,
but
it's real life.
Just think about, it's not just, you know, X club wants Y player. Y player also wants to know if he wants to move to that club. And if he wants to move to that club, well, what does he do about his kids who are currently in school? You know, if they're in school in, say, London, and he wants to move to Italy, to Rome, well, school's going back in September. He's got to sort all of that stuff out. Do his kids want to move? You know, how do they feel about it? There's a reason why, you know, we ended up with Petr Cech, because he didn't want to leave London.
Yeah. Well, and Willian, really.
And Willian, yeah. I mean, there's a number of reasons I think we ended up with Willian. But I think, it's players' reticences of wanting to move. This is the opposite reason of why, you know, Mustafi ended up at Schalke. He wanted to go back to Germany. Yeah. And there's always going to be these thoughts. We can't just say to, well, there's another player, Lucas Torreira.
Yeah, who people have forgotten is even on our books.
Yeah, I mean, I had to say to Simon, I was like, oh, by the way, what's going on here? Because I saw him in, I completely didn't even clock that he hadn't returned, and I just noticed on his Instagram he's still in the land of bachelor pies, Fray Bentos.
Uruguay, yeah.
And just wondering if he's just sitting out there because, again, we heard a lot in January that his dad, very vocal about, please let my son go to a club in Argentina, which is very big and prestigious, but has fuck all money, so can't give you a transfer fee.
Yeah. Thank you, please.
Thank you, please. Yeah, Buenos Aires to Fray Bentos is not a difficult commute, should we say?
No, certainly less than London.
Certainly less than London. But yeah, that is one of my kind of worries, is that, you know, we're kind of sitting there and maybe we send him on loan and people will go, oh, why can't we sell players? And you know what? We'll get a loan fee for them. They might give us a couple of million for Torreira, cover percentage of his wages. And then next summer, when we go, oh, you still want Lucas Torreira? We wanted, you know, 10 million last summer. You didn't want to give us 10 million. Well, you know what? You've got money now because you've managed to have fans back in. You had a good run in a couple of Libertadores, whatever, doing stuff in the league again. It's now 15, 20 million.
So like this is why this key is, these options of key of
I think it's
loan with option to buy, isn't it?
I think it's one of the things that why I get kind of annoyed with people who say Edu's done fuck all. A director of football, I don't think you can judge over 2 transfer windows, or even that. You look at their body work over a number of years.
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell, if you only looked at his spell at Roma, you could tell me that Monchi is the worst director of football in the entirety of Europe.
Yeah.
You could arguably make that point, that he is not a very good director of football. And then you look at his Sevilla record. You know, he built that up over a number of decades, even at Sevilla. That kind of quality, and why he's so heralded, you know, why we were pushing for him potentially as a director of football role under Emery. And I think for me, that's one of the things that we've kind of got to look at his body of work. Yeah, we ended up with an Edu. We ended up with what's his name? No, Willian.
Oh,
we ended up with Willian. We ended up with Willian. We're ending up with Willian. But there's also a lot of good players we've got over the thing. And it's strange that we don't necessarily always want to give them credit for stuff. We were like, oh, well, you know, that was Raul, or that was Kia, or that was Arteta got it over the line. But whenever it's a bad one.
It's because every Arsenal fan, as you well know by now, is not only a financial expert, but is also a clerical expert, an administration expert.
It's true.
and all of the above. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is fair probably to say that we're both in a similar boat, that we're kind of open-minded to the season. The one thing that I think we will be able to say with a bit of confidence is it will be an up and down ride. So I'm going to ask you the final question before we wrap here, and this is literally a one-word answer, so you're not even allowed to justify your reasons.
No.
You can't show you're working. Final position in the league next season. One word.
4th.
Okay. I've got a 6th, so we're not far apart.
No, but it's a very different part of the table, I think.
Yeah, it's very well financially yeah. Well, it's on record, so people
for
shoot
sure.
us down in 6 to 12 months' time and say, well, we're languishing in 12th at Christmas, and Arteta's gone, and we've brought Tommy Tickle or Owen Coyle in at Christmas. Then people will laugh at this. But
I think I will end my general point on the season for the next one, that I currently feel like somebody whose glass is not half full and is not half empty. It's just not necessarily the right size in a fan base full of people whose glass was full of piss and they've chucked it on the floor and it's in pieces. That's what it feels like right now.
And they scooped up little bits, and now it's got hair and all sorts.
Now they're trying to drink out of it, and they're getting cut lips, and they're pissing and moaning because their pissy drink has got blood and glass in it.
It's a glass of Hague Club whiskey with a douse of piss and an element of swirl and backwash in it. And hopefully we'll get the best out of it, but we can't guarantee.
And that's what it currently feels like being on Twitter, which is why I may have been a little quieter than normal in certain situations.
Likewise, yeah. I'm posting my runs and then I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. I apologised for calling out certain people about Ben White. I've apologised for that. I was wrong. It happens about once every 5 years. I'll take that on the chin. It's all good. Fabulous. Right. We'll leave it there then. Thank you, Josh, for your time. Listeners won't know this, but we're wrapping up at 11:45 at night. So ABW listeners out there, you say we don't do these things for you. We do. Trust me. I mean, it's partly my fault because I got home from run late and whatever. But, we stay up so you don't have to. That's the tagline we're going with. So that's another one in the can. As I say, thank you, Josh, for your time. It's been fun and reminiscing as well as remissing. No, we'll go with forward planning. That's a better version. Yeah. Just before we do wrap up, I do just want to say I'm not going to give individual shout outs because we'd be here all day, but the YouTube comments, the likes, the thumbs up, the Twitter comments, DMs, replies, etc., genuinely have touched me in that special little spot that no one likes to be touched in, at least not publicly. But no, genuinely, it's been really, really nice. People have really warmed to this series, and they seem to have enjoyed what we've put together here. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who has either tweeted me directly or the podcast, or, as I say, left a YouTube comment, because it's essentially the only way that we know if you enjoy these, by feedback and by downloads and listens. Sorry. So if you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to click the old subscribe thing and press the bell and put it on your face ache and your whatever, your Gramster, and I don't fucking know. Anyway, do all that good stuff because Danny does all that. So thank you very much. Share it with your friends if you've got any friends. Me and Josh don't have friends. That's why we talk to each other at 11:45 at night. But please do share our work. And if you do like this series, as I say, I've got no issue with continuing it into the season. We have still got a few guests that are in the pipeline, but some of them are a little bit... they have an entourage, shall we say. So I'm working my way through various agents and publishers and PR people and God knows what else. So hopefully bring you some news on those soon. But until then, we've got plenty more ABW members to work our way through, and indeed members of the Arsenal community. So until the next one, whenever that will be, Josh, thank you very much again. Much appreciated.
It's been an absolute pleasure as always. And I imagine Danny and the entire ABW fan base and community will be shocked that we kept this podcast under 4 hours.
Yes. Technically under 2 hours is quite an achievement. So we've done well. Fantastic. Well, that was ABW in conversation with Josh Daw. So thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. This has been a Bergkamp Wonderland, and we'll speak to you on the next one very soon.